finishing is the stage of the painting that happens once the central focal area approaches the desired impression and the desired stylistic choices that we want to have in the finished painting. And it's really where you're going to put in your highest highlights, your darkest darks, and do any bit of rendering. Most of the time that rendering would take place in your central focal area, and there would be less rendering out away from that central focal area, unless you're making an aesthetic choice to try to convey a painting with no focal area, and I know that's kind of a popular thing amongst some landscape painters these days. Also, just a couple of things about the whole entire painting process. And one of the things that I think governs the whole entire painting process is an overarching principle that just says that it's variety that brings richness and beauty to your paintings. So whether it's the block-in, the development, or the finishing stage, you do want to instill some variety in terms of different size shapes, different color temperature shifts, different values, different types of brushwork, different thicknesses of paint. So you're always trying to go for some variety. But there is a breaking point when too much variety will actually begin to fracture the painting. And by the same token, there's a harmony and a unity in a painting that we're trying to achieve. And unity is sort of the opposite of variety in a way, where too much unity will actually make a painting boring. So you've got to strike a real delicate balance, and I think the greatest art actually does strike that balance. It's an elusive thing. It's not a cut and dried thing. It's kind of where literalness and poetry meet. Each artist is going to have a different sensibility towards that. Anyway, that's kind of highly philosophical and theoretical, but those are things that I do think about while I'm painting. And without further ado, let's get back to work, and let's see what I can do to finish this thing off. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do here is see if I can increase the saturation of the colors in my wave face there, especially as they move towards the top. I still don't want to really disturb this value and color. This is really a key, meaning this is the value and color that controls everything else. It's essentially the darkest thing in the whole painting, and it's pretty grayed. It's got a blue-green quality to it, but it's still pretty gray. And as I move up, remember I've said this, the wave is going like this, and it's gradually curling over. And up at the top, you've got less water, so it's just thinner there, and so you get more light penetrating through the water there. So that's why you see an increase in value. But it also can take on some of the temperature of sunlight, which is a yellowish kind of light. And I do feel like if I increase the temperature there, I'm going to create a little more interest in the painting, and a lot more richness, and also I can go a little bit darker there if I, with an increase in the color temperature, I can darken this a little bit so that it'll be different and recede behind the tube, which is coming forward. I think sometimes one of the things that we do as artists is sometimes do with value what we could have done with color. And I think sometimes, you can do what I'm doing now and exaggerate the color a little bit, and it'll make the painting stronger and have more interest. Really trying to see how far I can push that. I can always back off of it if I decide I need to. This is also a point where, some artists might say, well, the water's really more turquoisey than that, so I'm going to get my tube of turquoise out. I tend to try to avoid such decisions and just work with my usual color palette. I will end up creating harmony based on the colors that I normally use, and it will also be in continuity with my normal body of work, which is based on this palette that I use, painting in and painting out. Getting a glare off of my overhead light here, so I'm going to change the direction of the stroke. And I want to soften this transition, so I'm just going to sort of blend with a Q-tip right here. I'm just trying to create a little bit of interest and variety in the top of the wave crest here. Maybe there's a little spill starting to happen right there. This is also a point in the painting process where I will reach for some smaller brushes and even some softer brushes. The brush that I currently have in my hand is something called an Egbert. I don't know if you can see that. It's a long, skinny version of a filbert, and you can get some really nice fluid strokes out of it. Maybe a little darker than what I want to be right there, or a little lighter than what I want to be right there. So make a couple quick adjustments. I'm trying to show a little smoother transition in that wave face without losing my darkest dark there. And since the paint underneath is dry, I'm just softening with a Q-tip. Maybe that got a little too warm, so I'm going to plunk a little something a little cooler back in there. So one of the things that you're trying to accomplish as you're doing some finishing is what I call orchestrating the painting. Another word for that might be, you're trying to see just what range, and especially temperature shifts and value shifts, what will the painting bear and not fracture, still hold together? And so that's part of what I'm doing here. I'm trying to see, what bit, how much turquoise will that thing really bear, and how much saturation will it bear in that part of the painting. And yeah, there's some risks sometimes involved in that. Not as much when you're working wet over dry, but when you're working wet into wet, sometimes you're in a finishing stage and everything's wet because you're working on a one-shot painting, and some of these changes a little riskier because if they don't work out, it's a little hard to go back. But when you're working wet over dry, it's a little less risky. Now wanted to see how much translucency I could get away with. A little bit of a shadow right under there that's kind of gray blue looking. A little bit of a shadow right here too, because that wave's rolling over. See how with my hand's casting a shadow on itself? Same thing is happening in that part of the wave. I want to reinforce the tube here a little bit with a little bit more color. I don't want to go as saturated as I did in that wave face, but I think the painting will bear a little more development and a little more color, as well as some value there. Part of what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing some of that light blue, which is the reflection of the sky, and I'm pulling it down while I have some darker value there for the top of the tube on my brush, and it's making an interesting sort of a wet and wet blend without me actually blending. Now I'm going to take a little bit of that bluish gray color that I just used towards the base of the tube there, and I'm mixing a little bit of white and a little bit of my scarlet cadmium. This is an intermediate color and value for that splash. That's pretty dark on my palette, and it looks really light up there, so I feel like I can go a little darker. Notice how I'm just sort of rolling the brush, getting some variety of little touches here, trying to stay with a free sort of brush stroke, so not too rendered to what I call the hunt and poke and peck, or hunt and peck. This is also a stage of the painting where I get into a lot of what I like to call read and react. I just look, I read, I react, and make decisions. They're not haphazard decisions, but nonetheless, I'm trying to definitely have some sort of, or maintain some sort of spontaneity and freedom in my brush strokes right at the moment. Working really hard down on the palette. Much harder down on the palette than I am on the painting. And again, I'm using my white with approximately 20% of my painting medium mixed in. So all these mixtures are having some medium involved in them. Really, this blending with this Q-tip, all I'm really doing is taking paint off. I'm not blending so much as just removing some paint. I want to get a clean brush, and I'm going to go into a clean pile of white there, and I am going to mix a fresh pile of paint to represent the foam in light. So remember, sunlight is warm, so this is a very warm mixture that on the palette looks pretty yellow, pretty orangey, but on the painting it's going to read as white. Just wowza, that is electric. Probably a little too much. So what I do in that instance is I'll just put a little touch of maybe my alizarin crimson in the mixture. That'll cut that down a little bit. I may even add a little tiny touch of viridian just to neutralize that effect, just a hair, but it's still overall it's a warm color. So this is one of those stages in painting now where you'll go, oh boy, did I screw it up? Am I ever gonna get it to look right? Oh boy. Remember, this stuff is all moving, so ultimately I don't want any hard edges. And so that's part of the reason why I'm getting a lot of wet paint everywhere and restating this whole splash. With wet paint, then I have a lot better shot at getting some of the nice, flowing, beautiful, soft edges that I'm really looking for in that splash. And remember, it's those soft edges at the bottom of the wave and within the wave itself that gives the sense of motion. You're only going to see a hard edge up at the top of the wave. Use your finger blender. Sometimes you got to make sure it's clean. Accidentally move some light bright foamy color up there to where my tube is, and don't want it. So now I just got to restate though. Notice I'm not wiping it out, scraping it down or anything. I'm just going to paint right into it and reestablish. So there's an interesting thing about light. Light actually flows a little bit like water. So if I've got light hitting this part of this splash, going this direction, then it stands to reason that it would continue um, the wall of the splash here is sort of receding back from where this is, and then that light just sort of hits the next thing available for it to run into. And I think it's that spill, even when you're painting clouds, usually just anything. If you can follow the flow of the light in your painting, you can develop a pretty authentic quality of light in your painting. Notice I'm really, at this point, for quite a while actually in the painting, I have not really been looking very much at my reference. I'm just creating a piece of art here. I'm not at all trying to copy the photo. For all intents and purposes, the photo has some flaws in it anyway. So it wouldn't make all that much sense to really just copy it. I'm going to take one of these small brushes that I used for blue and clean it so that I can use it for a lighter value. So the way I clean it, instead of using mineral spirits, you can't see it's off camera, but I dipped it in some of the oil that I have in my cup on the side of the palette here, and I'm just kind of dabbing it on my palette and then wiping it out. Then I'm going to pick up a little bit of my medium, and I'm going to swish the brush around in a little pile of medium, and that's going to pull some more of that blue-green color off of the brush and clean it without ever getting into the medium. And I'm just splaying the brush out into a pile of that paint, so as you can see it's pretty splayed out. See that? And I'm just going to try to get some somewhat random things happening here without going hog wild. Time for a little palette knife action. There's also a way of blending and softening. If I overdo it, I'll just get bad. I've still got all that paint from the tube. I've still got those piles of paint right here on my palette, so it's not going to be a big deal to bring some color back into that. seeing if I can get away with a little extra value, extra step, half step in value. But what I don't want to do is lose the solid form that I had already painted, especially the darkening of the tube up at the top and the slight darkening at the bottom. I could probably noodle on this for a while longer and it would change and maybe get better, maybe get worse, but it would definitely change, but I don't know that it's going to be appreciably different with a whole lot of more manipulation. So I'm just about ready to stop in this part of the painting, bring some other stuff towards the finish. I want to see what I can accomplish at the top of my spray there. That can be a slightly defined area, but I also wonder if, you know, even though I've got wet paint over dry, can I find a tool that will sort of blend that in a way that doesn't look too contrived? I may have to go into my some color of the background water and get some wet background color there. Although that's not bothering me too awful much. I love this tool. Still getting used to it, but look at that. That worked great. Just spreading some paint around with this thing. Make sure it's clean and just ever so slightly soften in the midst of that. I remember a while ago, oh gosh, this goes way back in probably the early 2000s, when I was pretty new to painting and as far as very serious, you know, and pursuing it as a career. And I was just a sponge, constantly learning. I remember going to a show at a gallery down in Naples, and we were looking at a showing of an artist named Kim English's work, and Kim is a great painter, and he comes from Colorado. Really had been doing these, and still is, these great figurative scenes with figures on a street side, and they really had such a bright quality of sunlight to them. And I remember going by, and I especially walked up close to one that was of a figure standing at a sort of farmer's market, and I was up close, you know, within a foot, looking closely at it, the way artists look at paintings a lot. I'm like, this is kind of sloppy. I don't know why they think this guy is so good. and continued around the room, and I happened to hear a noise on the other side of the room where that painting was, and I whipped my head around to see what that noise was, and I caught a glimpse of the painting of the woman at the farmer's market that I had previously thought, oh, that's not that good, it's all sloppy. And from a distance, that thing really came together and was gorgeous, but up close, it was really a mess, a chaotic mess of strokes, and I didn't really get it at the time. But that was a sign of a good painting, and I'll never forget that moment, because from that day on I started to figure out that what painterliness was all about. And my painting here, I don't think you can see on the camera, but I'm constantly stepping back after every few strokes to see how the painting reads from a distance of about 6 feet, because up close all I'm really seeing is this chaos of brushwork. But from a few steps back, it tightens up, and I focus less on the brushwork and more on the image, and that's a sign of a good painting. You want it to be so that when you're up close, you focus on the mosaic of the brushwork, and when you step back, you're really focusing on the image created by that mosaic. All right, so I'm pretty happy, pretty satisfied with the development here in the main wave. I think I just see another good touch. It's just still a little bit flat there. I want to see if I can bring out the volume of that tube a little more, and I'm going to try doing that with some highlights, very judicially placed highlights. And those highlights, I'm adding some yellow and some white to my pile of blue-green that I used there in the first place, just to raise the value and warm it up a little bit. See if I can get that tube, middle part of that tube, to come forward a little more. Actually, I'm going to add another halftone here. That's bringing out the volume of it. And then this area a little darker. There we go. Now that brings out some of the volume, and then I can get highlight on that. There we go. Now we've got some more volume, a little better three-dimensional look to that area. So now I'm going to go for a highlight. Let's see how yellow I can get and still remain green. There we go. I'm much happier with that. So then I think the last thing that I want to do is there is the opportunity to get some highlights here in the foreground foam blanket. Let's see if I can manage that with a palette knife. This is all dry paint down here, and each one of these little, there's some verticality here in the areas where the foam is built up a little bit thicker on the underneath lying layer of water, and if the light is coming across this direction, it's going to hit some of those sides and light them up a little bit. And none of this is really just perfectly flat. It's a lot of irregular movement going on. And so I'm going to get some of those highlights up there, and then I'm going to see about adjusting them. There's some turbulent areas here. That could be catching a lot of light. Let's see what happens. Alright, well this thing's not quite doing exactly, it's not bad. All this stuff, if I don't like it, I'll be able to definitely wipe it off. So that just adds a little bit of dimension to my foam blanket, which adds some interest and some believability, authenticity, whatever, however you'd like to say it. Re-establishing my occlusion shadow there. Let's see if I can get back in and re-establish, restate that reflection of the splash. I guess you would call this little technique here some scumbling. Remember, this is all moving here, so you would not be able to really focus on it and see hard edges. So that's why I'm softening all that with just the flat side of the knife. Still feel it's necessary to indicate the value of that occlusion shadow that would be there. So now I'm very close to over too much information in, well, I don't know if I'm saying too much information, but I'm close to having pushed the painting to the limits of what it will bear, but there's still something I want to try. Is I want to try and put some subtle foam trails that just trickle off the face of the wave down onto the horizontal flat surface out in front. These are kind of things that can easily be overdone. So this is definitely a case where, you know, less is more. And I'll use sort of a Z sort of stroke. Now the thing is, when these things are up on the wave, when they're up on the wave, you see them more like this, so they're going to be wider. As they come down onto the flat lying plane, you're seeing them from a more oblique angle, so you won't see them as thick. It's sort of a matter of perspective. Of course, they're in shadow while they're on the face of the wave. So, but you can use them to sort of explain the curve in water. Just softening their edge. Definitely already to the point where they're almost too much. So I'm just gonna see if I can connect a couple of these to the overall foam blanket. Definitely want to use that one to direct your eye back towards the main wave. And I think this stuff here has gotten too prominent. So I've got to find a way to break it, subdue it, change it. So that it doesn't control your eye and pull you over there too much. feel like it's better, pretty subtle like that. And I'm just about pushing it beyond where I should. All right, I think I'm going to stop right there. So while I still have this picture on the screen, I want to draw your attention to the lip and curl. I don't know if you can see my cursor there or not. Let me get my annotator out. So I want to draw your attention to the lip and curl right there. And just reiterate, finally my chat came up. I've been pushing chat for like 10 minutes and it wouldn't come up, and finally it just popped through. But anyway, so one thing that I see sometimes in a lot of artists' work is they're learning how to paint or how to handle wave subject. The light that's sweeping across here, and it lights up this side of the big splash, but it really doesn't light up the foam along here because it's in a different plane. So always be mindful and try to practice imagining how that light's going to flow across your scene and what it's going to hit. So it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to take the light from this part of the splash and just paint it all the way up that lip and curl right there. It just wouldn't read properly. So anyway, I am going to end the screen share and take a quick look at the which area is usually warmer, the tube or the wave face. That's going to have a lot to do with where the light is hitting, where the light is coming from, with what's in light and what's in shadow. So it just warm light, cool shadows. So you're just gonna have to, I think, part of the way you can get to where you can figure that kind of stuff out from painting to painting is to spend some time at the beach and watch how the light is playing out across the wave. Most of the time, where the sunlight is hitting the wave, that's going to be the warmest color that you're going to see in the water. So anyway, I hope that helps. If anybody has any other questions, you can raise your hand and you can unmute and ask a question. We've got about 14 minutes left, or you can type one into the chat as well. All right, so I'm going to just share a couple of simple screens. Oh, wait, I got a question from Don who says, what did you use at the base of the lip? You captured the reflection beautifully there. Not sure what tone you used. That reflection was something that gave me a little bit of trouble, partially because I think the photos don't always tell you the truth as far as color goes. Excuse me. But what I reasoned out was things that are in the light will reflect, their reflections will be slightly darker and cooler. Things that are in shadow, their reflections will be slightly lighter and warmer. So a reflection balances things out. I looked at that light reflecting there. I couldn't discern from the photo what it really was. So I just made it a little darker and a little cooler, but it was cooler towards the muted red, orangey red side of cooler. It wasn't a bluer cooler, it was a redder cooler. And I put it in and took it out, put it in and took it out. And some of the things were cut out of the video because I didn't think you wanted to see every single stroke in the course of that painting, but trial and error and just the principles. So
Robert, I have a question. Can you hear me?
yes.
I have some confusion about how the wave is actually reflecting down into the body of water. I understand if you have a body of still water with the tree reflecting down, I kind of get how that works, but I'm not sure I understand on the structure of the wave where the reflection is coming from that's hitting the water.
So
Yeah.
in my painting, let's just make sure we're talking about the same thing so we're not being confused. In my painting, the only thing really reflecting in the painting is that bit of splash that's in the bright sunlight. Is that what you're talking about?
I guess that is it, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so whether the sheet of water out in front of it is moving or standing still, there's still going to be some reflection. It still has its mirror-like quality unless there's foam laying there. Now, if there was foam laying on that area right out in front of the splash, then you wouldn't see any reflection because the foam is also brightly colored, right?
And so there's no reflection coming off the crest of the wave where the foam is up at the top or any of that area.
I think it was so minor, or it would have been far enough down that it would be where foam was.
Okay. All right.
So I didn't go for it. I figured my central area where that main bright part of the splash was, if that's reflecting, that'll carry the story. But you know, it's an interesting thing. Next time you're out at the beach on a sunny day, squint your eyes and look for the reflection of that foam out in front of the wave. It's amazing sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't even see it when you're there. You take a photo and it shows up in the photo. So
it's interesting to think of water reflecting into water. So and it can confuse my brain. So
well, if you were to hold up a mirror in your bathroom, wouldn't your bathroom mirror reflect the mirror that you were holding up?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a reflective surface is going to reflect what it's facing to one degree or another, you know?
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so can I explain, Rhonda says, where'd it go? I thought I saw a question from Rhonda. Oh.
Yes, can you explain the reason the top of the tube is darker? Is it because the light isn't hitting the top or just to show the form of the tube?
Yeah, let me grab a paper towel here real quick and I'll see if I can demonstrate that. So when we're looking at the tube, we're essentially looking at something that resembles a roll of paper towels. If we look at it from the side, like we're looking up the barrel of the wave, turn it this way, up here at the top, I hope you can see that, up here at the top, you're looking at this much water. Down here, you're only looking at this much water. Okay, so you're looking through or into more depth of water, even though it's at the top of a tube and it's in motion, you're still looking at more water, and so it's darker, not as much light penetrates through that. Where the water is thinner, like in the wave face, sometimes that'll get lighter because light will penetrate through it. So it's, and I would say even if you don't fully understand that, I would recommend two things. Trust that that's true and go to the beach and try to observe it and see if you can see it. And I bet you'll see it every single time. And over time, it's just going to click for you. All right. Maybe Linda said maybe it's like a glass jar and you can see the thickness of the glass on the edge. It is kind of like a glass jar. When you're looking obliquely across a jar, you're looking through more glass than when you're looking straight into the thing. That's a great point, Linda. Thank you very much. Okay, any last questions? I just wanted to quick share a couple of things in way of closing, you know, some closing thoughts that I'd like to leave you with. Hopefully I won't have any trouble. Here we go. All right, so just wanted to point out, and this is something that meant so much to me when it finally dawned on me that what I was really doing, I was never really painting waves or water or boats or grass or people or sand. What I was actually painting were shapes. Some shapes were bigger, some were smaller, some were square, some were kind of oval, some were triangular. Some were totally irregular. But everything has a large basic shape. And each one of those shapes has values, meaning they're either lighter or darker, or somewhere in between. And each one of those shapes that are either lighter or darker also has some color. And then the juncture where one shape meets another, that point where those two shapes meet, there's an edge there. And I'll tell you what, that really took me a long time to figure out that I wasn't ever really painting edges in my paintings. And finally someone said, hey man, did you ever think about learning about edges? And you know, it was a really nice guy that I won't mention his name, and he was just concerned and gave me some blunt advice. He said, you don't have any edge management in your paintings, but each one of those junctures, each one of those edges, they can be hard, they can be soft, and they can be lost, and they can be found. And then the other thing is, you know, we're just handling paint quality or texture. Some of our paint is thinner, some is thicker, some is opaque, and some is relatively transparent or semi-transparent. And when I realized that painting wasn't really about learning how to paint things, and started operating on what I think here is a little more abstract level of shapes, values, colors, edges, and paint quality, I started to get better. That and it helps you develop your powers of observation when you know what you're looking for is, okay, how big is this shape compared to that shape?
how dark is this compared to that? This color, is it warmer or cooler than that other color? And so on and so forth. So I just wanted to emphasize a little bit this idea of learning to paint on a little more abstract level instead of trying to paint things. And I think we grow faster when we do that. So I am going to stop that screen share, and then I got one more thing here. And these are some notes which I mentioned earlier, and I just want to quickly read them. I got about 4 or 5 minutes. I'm just going to touch on these highlighted parts. You should be able to find this online. These are the Sergei Bongart notes on painting. They're compiled and edited by Norm Nason. Now, mind you, this is painting methods of someone who was known as a colorist. So he was really working primarily with color, and his paintings really exuded that understanding and love for color. But I love a couple of these things he says. He said, in art, the hardest skill to learn is to be simple. As artists, we have a natural inclination to create detail. We must overcome this tendency. The first rule is to begin big and simple, then move toward small and complex. The best art amazes us because of what the artist left out, not because of what he or she put in. That's one of those things you can ponder for quite a long time. I think it's packed and so powerful, but it's not really one of those things you instantly understand. It takes some reflection to really wrap your mind around that idea that it's what the artist leaves out that's most interesting. If everything is included, why not photograph the subject instead? Any beautifully rendered detail can be strengthened by this editing process. Even a photorealist must leave some things out. It is the artist's job to only put in the information that speaks to the relevant issues. Then skipping down, he says, understand the basis of composing a picture in color, which is basically what I demonstrate here. I was composing in color right from the very beginning. No color should be viewed in isolation, but rather in constant relationship to what is around it. A color is what it appears to be only because of its relationship to the surrounding colors. Nothing exists in isolation. Each previous color choice must be re-evaluated as a new color is placed alongside of it. If you change one color, you have in effect changed them all. And then down at the bottom, last but not least, he advises, and this sort of speaks to how we handle the block-in and how we decide whether we're still in block-in or we're moving forward to development. He says, work around the canvas 2 or 3 times or more before moving to any detail. It's entirely possible and often advisable to spend 90% of your time merely adjusting the big, simple shapes before ever moving to the rendering. Once this is satisfactory, the chosen style or technique can be completed with confidence up to and including ultra-tight realism. So I guess I would just say, and I'm not exempting myself from this advice, I think we can always spend more time in that block-in stage to make sure our shapes are beautiful, they're not repeating sizes and distances, that there's good variety in them, and that our value structure is really solid, and that our general color relationships are what we see in our reference or what we're looking for in our painting. So 90% of your time merely adjusting the big simple shapes. And if we do that and we really get a solid block in, the development and the finish are pretty easy. So, all right, that's all I have. Does anybody have anything left to ask? I thought I could see bright highlights of spray over the surface. Did you add those? That comes from Corinne. So in the tube right there at the very end, I was using a brush with some very bright, very high key yellow, and I was touching it and dragging it on the tube, and that did leave some very subtle highlights that I thought really brought out a lot of sparkle and really added to making the painting and the water look wet. So great question. As always, feel free to email me. Oh, and I wanted to say, I'm inviting everybody who's working on a painting. If you want to take what we've gone over in session 2 and session 3 and put some time in on that and bring it to what you feel good about, what you think is a nice finish, and email that to me. I'll send you another nice video critique so you get to see my smiling face one more time. All right, the water behind the wave, this is Rhonda, will typically be darker till the horizon line. So there's a lot of things that govern whether the water behind the wave keeps getting darker until the horizon line. If we go out to the beach, we stand and look out on the Gulf of Mexico or even the ocean, the water usually does appear darker at the horizon line. And a big reason for that is because it's deeper water there. So it looks darker. Now, is that something that you need to put in your painting? I don't know. There are plenty of times when I really soften that horizon line edge. I don't darken the water at the horizon because I don't want more contrast out there. If I paint that darker water out at the horizon, I may be installing a level of contrast that pulls the eye away from what I really want them to look at. So if I'm painting a wave and I want you to love my wave and see how smart a wave painter I am, I don't want to put something out there on that horizon that's going to pull you away from my main wave. So even if you see it, that doesn't mean it has to go in there. So what colors they're coming fast. Let's see. Thank you, Robert. You're welcome, Carol. Where were you able to send out a critique to everyone? Everyone that I saw a block in from, I did send them a critique. So if you want to resend it, send it to robertjsimone@gmail.com. I'll type that in here. So, I don't know what I'm doing. Technically not all that savvy today. I'm just putting my email in the chat. And I got a couple of more questions to field. So what colors did you use in your sky? This comes from Linda Welsh. The sky was a combination of a couple of different complements, and I really didn't touch that sky really after the second pass through in the block in. I don't think I really painted it anymore. It just was functioning and doing fine. But it was a lot of ultramarine, which was moderated or muted a little bit by some burnt sienna. So 2 nice complements, and then white added to that. And then some of it was mixed viridian with a little bit of alizarin and white added to that until I have a couple of nice bluish, purpley bluish grays going. And that's pretty much what they were. And Amy says the foam in the finished painting is much more detailed than what we've gone over in class. How do you suggest we get more detail? So I really think that there's an illusion going on there that you saw most of the work I did on the splash and on the tube. I think there's a suggestion of detail going on there. That created an illusion. There was a time when I took a small sort of softer brush and I splayed it out. I just jammed it down onto the palette and I got it to splay out like that. And then I scooped up some paint with it. And it made a lot of interesting little small random marks. And I just kept putting things in and pulling them out. And it created the illusion of a lot of detail. I really didn't paint any detail. It's not something that comes easy. There's no replacement for time spent at the easel. And I think if I can do it, everybody could do it. It's just a matter of really working at it and really getting to develop a sense for what your tools will do. Could we see a photo of your finished painting? Yeah, so if you check out, I think the first video, the finished painting was framed. At the very beginning of that video, there was a shot of that. And during that whole Zoom meeting in that first session, that painting was sitting on the easel behind me. Also, you can go to robertjsimone.com. I'll put that in here. That's my website, robertjsimone.com. And it's posted on the website. So you shouldn't have any trouble finding it. Thank you. You're welcome. No, I meant just up till the horizon, Rhonda says, but dark behind the wave. In this case, so to revisit Rhonda's question, I did use some darker value right behind the wave. Not sure I really saw it there, but I knew if I put it behind the wave, it would help that wave stand out and read a little better. So that may have just been an artificial something that I put in the wave or in the background water to help the definition of my main wave. So lots of thank yous here. So you're welcome. When did you work some more on the distant water behind the wave? I really didn't do much work back there. I may have done just a little bit, and it was just lightening it a little bit, and it may have not made the final cut on the video, but I really hardly did anything back there. I really thought the painting that main wave was the best lesson, and so I focused most of my time on that. All right, so that looks like, thanks for attending, everybody. Really enjoyed doing this. I learned tons of stuff about technology and where my technical weaknesses are in handling Zoom. But anyway, I enjoyed it. Thanks so much. And send me those paintings if you'd like a little critique. All right, thanks.